Good afternoon. I'm Steve Meyer. I'm an economist with Kerns and Associates. I changed at the beginning of the year, and so I have to show you the same thing that means the same thing as what Joe told you a while ago. If you listen to me and do anything, it's your own darn fault. So we're going to talk about demand, especially we're going to focus on the second one there, even though we are going to talk about domestic demand. That's a pretty good story. There's some clouds on the horizon, though, that we need to talk about. Exports, of course, has been kind of all exports, all trade, all the time this week. Pork production, we're going to talk about world production and then domestic production. Then we'll get into some things on cost of production profitability. I show you the Dow Jones Industrial Average here because it dominated the news earlier this year. We had this big sell-off between January and March. It was 11.6%. It officially accounts for a technical correction, which would be 10% or more move in one direction. We've come back off of that, so we're just about back at the January 1 level as of earlier this week. If you notice, the trend line that we were on back before that big run-up from July through January of 2018, the trend line we were on before that time period, we're right back on that trend line now. Now, that's one point. The second point is that's a really long trend line if you go all the way back at how long this expansion has been going on. It's pushing on 10 years now. It's the second longest in record. There are some clouds on the horizon that we're concerned about. The GDP is still growing 2.5% to 3% virtually every quarter. That's a solid thing. This economy is on a solid footing. I'm not too worried about that. But this is the one I'm concerned about. This is a model by Dr. Robert Dealey out of Chicago with no-spin forecast. He has a thing called the enhanced aggregate spread that works off of some spreads in interest rates and spreads between the unemployment rate and the inflation rate. And when this number drops below 200, it has successfully predicted every recession since 1900. It has only given one false during that time period, and that was a recession that was caused by a steel strike. Okay? So, and it dropped below 200 in April. And it has a 9-month forward look, and that means that according to Dr. Dealey, we begin recession-eligible months in January. Now, that doesn't mean a recession is going to start in January. Normally, the NBER that does the kind of the post-mortem on the economy and says, oh, the recession started in April of 2008 or whenever it started, they usually miss this by 6 or 8 months. We're usually into a recession before they officially declare a recession. So we're concerned about 2019. This thing has been uncannily accurate. And so we're watching this. Does that mean that pork demand is going to fall out of bed in 2019? No, not necessarily. But it does mean that as the economy slows and if you start reducing wage growth and you get some unemployment, you may start seeing some negatives on meat demand because people won't eat out as much. They'll trade down in value on products that they're buying. And so it is a concern, and I think we'll be watching it very closely going through this year and into next year, but it is 2019 that this is suggesting some problems. In the meantime, consumer attitudes are as good as they've been in almost 20 years. All of our indexes of consumer attitudes are very, very high relative to history. Unemployment is down to 3.8%. That's the green bars in this chart. That's probably lower than it needs to be. It's certainly lower than the natural rate of unemployment. And so we think that this is one of the signs of an economy that's coming from the expansion phase into what is called the boom phase. And that, of course, is just before we usually have an end to that run of the business cycle and a turn the other way. Now, all of this is good because we're going to bring consumers records amount, very close to record amount of per capita supply of beef, pork, chicken, and turkey in 2019. We're going to be a little short of that record of 220 pounds that was set back in 2006. This year, we think we're going to be right at or above that next year. So we're going to ask them to eat a lot of product. And so the question from a demand standpoint is, how much are they going to pay to do that? Demand is consumption at a price. It's not just consumption. And prices have been good. The pink line here is retail pork prices. We've moved them kind of to a new plateau in the last decade. And people, one of the things is, if you're in business and you're trying to push up your prices, what happens when you first raise prices? Your customers are all really mad, aren't they? All right? But if you can push them up and they stay there for a while, what do the customers do? They get accustomed to the new pricing range. And our customers have done that. And that's a good thing for the industry, because no dollar ever gets to a producer that doesn't go through a grocery store or a restaurant first. Okay, so if we can't get money in that end of it, we're not going to get it back to the producer level. Positive price gains is good. I think we're going to see these under some pressure this year. They're probably going to come down some. I don't think they're going to come down anywhere near where they used to be. The one that's going to be under some real pressure here is the beef prices. And that, we had 11.6 million cattle on feed last month in the United States. That's the second largest total ever. All right, 11.6 million. There's going to be some pressure on beef prices as we go through the rest of this year. We've already seen a break in the fat cattle market. Part of that's caused by pretty tight slaughter capacity on the beef side, but still, we're going to see more supply there. On chicken, they've maintained their prices remarkably well historically. They're not growing very much, only about 1% growth on chicken this year. That's mainly due to productivity problems within their breeder flocks. We think next year we're going to see 2 to 3% growth in the chicken business. They have 5 new complexes that are going to open over the next 24 months, 23 months. 2 of them will be up by the end of this year, 2 next year, 1 probably in early 2020. They're moving back to a growth phase in the business by adding new complexes. So we could see some lower chicken prices in 2019. We don't expect much pressure this year. When we put quantity times real price together to compute real per capita expenditures, it's a good measure of demand. You can see we had a big run in 2014 and 15. We've come off of that some, but we're still growing. And this year, demand for all meats, for the top 3 species, down about 1% year to date. But when we look at pork, we're up 1.6%. March was dead even with a year ago. The data for the April calculations comes out tomorrow morning. I think it's probably going to be at or slightly above year-ago levels. So pork demand looks to be in very good shape. I'm not worried about that as we go through this year. So anybody that's talking about the hog market and say, well, demand isn't very good, I would beg to differ on that. I think demand has been excellent at the retail level, at the consumer level. I think with our packing plants that we've opened, demand for hogs has been excellent. The packer margins have been squeezed pretty hard. Our hog prices would be substantially lower if gross packer margins were at the level of last year than they are this year. Now that's not good for the packers, and there are some weeks when packers have reduced their slaughter because of that. We'll talk about that in just a moment. On the trade side, a lot of things going on, not the least of which is about a 5% gain in the value of the U.S. dollar over the last 6 or 8 weeks. This makes us less competitive. Now, one of the reasons we had record exports in 2017 was that the dollar devalued by a little over 10% over about a 14-month period. And that was a devaluation that very few people expected when the Trump administration was elected. So we lost some value. That makes our trade goods less expensive. We benefited from that last year. This has been a bit of a headwind this year, but our exports have still been quite good this year. If we look at March, up 2.7% from a year ago. We were up almost 6% at the end of March. The product weight data came out yesterday from the Foreign Ag Service, and April exports were up 18% from a year ago. Now, I will point out that a year ago, April was not very good, so there's a bit of a denominator effect, but still, that's a big growth rate, and it's been a remarkable story so far this year, especially against all the negatives. Of course, China announced that they were going to put on a tariff back in March or April, early April, I guess it was. We said at the time that we thought that the real impact of this was going to be on byproducts. And if you look at the right-hand panel there, China and Hong Kong account for about 9% of our exports of muscle cuts. They account for 60% of our exports of byproducts. I characterize those things as things that haven't been served in the Meyer household recently, okay, and probably won't ever be. Stomachs, kidneys, all kinds of things that generally the only market we have is export markets. Well, we didn't think it would have a big impact on the Chinese on our exports to China because we didn't expect our exports from China. This happens every year. The band starts warming up. Thank you, I'm glad to be here. So we didn't think that they were going to buy very much from us this year, so we didn't think there'd be a big impact on the muscle cut side. On the other hand, the byproducts, we expected that to be a real negative and probably be a drag on packer margins and thus a drag on hog prices. What's happened since mid-April? The byproduct value per head's gone up $2. All right. Now, perhaps it would have gone up $3 had this Chinese situation not been there, but still, it has not been a big impact yet. And here's a chart of the byproducts. That's the red line there. You can see they've fallen in value since the 2011, 12, 13 time period, but still contribute significantly more per head than they did at one time. Mexico, of course, is a different story. They're our number one individual customer for byproducts, our number one muscle meat customer, our number two value customer. This is the growth of Mexico, and I want you to really focus on 2010 and 11. Exports to Mexico were growing pretty steadily, and then 2010 and 11, there's a lot of variability, but you can see it's basically flat. What happened in 2010 and 11? What happened in 2010 and 11? We had a tariff over a trucking spat. It was 5%, by the way. That was the tariff on U.S. pork going into Mexico. And we flattened them out for about a year and a half there. Then off we go with growth again. So now we have a tariff that went on yesterday that they're putting on. The current situation, we think, it's rising to 20% on July 5th. Clearly a fix this message from the Mexicans. We're going to put it on here, and we're going to make it more painful in a few weeks. The scuttlebutt at the moment is that this will get taken care of before that happens. And we've been doing some calculations, and we're pretty sure that even with a 10% tariff, we probably are still the best value of hams going into Mexico. The alternative is to bring them from Canada, which that's obviously a longer trip, or frozen hams from the EU, frozen hams from Brazil, or frozen hams from Chile. The industry is not set up to use frozen hams. And so it's going to be pretty nip and tuck on that, but I think we very well might still be the best source of hams down there. We could still see some price impact because of the tariff, but we would only say maybe $1 to $2 on the cutout value in the short run here, and we hope things get fixed after that. Now, the much bigger deal, and this is the way that tariff works. When you put on a percentage tariff, it shifts the demand curve downward. The new quantity comes off of that new intersection there, and you see the price in the shipping country, the price in the buying country. The difference is the tariff, and the quantity taken reduces somewhat. I'm going to skip this next one, and we're going to go on. And so the last word on this. I kind of liken this Mexican situation. If you have a conflict with somebody and he fires a bullet 10 feet over your head, are you hurt? Okay? I would say, no, you're not hurt. Did you just get the bejeebies scared out of you? Yeah. I think that's where we are, okay? I don't think this is going to be a disastrous kind of thing for the industry, but it is a harbinger of a 20% tariff that will be more damaging, and especially if NAFTA goes south, that is a bad one. Then they actually shoot at you, Bill Levin. That might hurt a little more. Yeah, right there, okay? All right, world pork production set to grow 2.3% this year, the largest single-year growth since 2012. We're setting new records for pork production the last 2 years after a couple of down years. If we look at countries, of course, when you put China pork production on any graph with everybody else, everyone else kind of disappears because China has half the world pigs in the world. They eat half the pork in the world. This has got China at the top, the EU. The U.S. is the third line down, and others not listed here are the next line down. If we pull all those out so we can see the others, we can see that everyone is growing except Brazil. This is a Foreign Ag Service forecast. If we look at the numbers on this, I think the important thing in this table is of all of the observations of year-to-year changes on all these countries, there's 10 negatives and 45 positives on that table. All right? It is growth. This is a growth business. Our number for 2018 is the largest on there at 4.8% according to the Foreign Ag Service. We're not quite that large, but we're over 4% for growth this year on production, and you can see other countries have significant growth rates as well. If we look at U.S. production, this is the March Hogs and Pigs report. Most of you have seen this. It was very close. Hello, Lyndon. It was very close to expectations, which means that it was pretty well priced into the market. We're not too concerned about that, but notice the growth rates, 3%, 1.5% on the breeding herd, 2+% on farrowings and farrowing intentions. this is still a growth industry, and we're still growing the breeding herd. I don't think there's any indication that that has slowed. What does it mean? The inventory of market hogs continues to go up at a rapid pace. Not only is the breeding herd growing, but productivity continues to grow. And even if we stop the growth of the breeding herd, we're not going to stop the growth of productivity. And so we're going to have more market hogs to work with. You can see the clear change in the trend lines here. The other thing I'd point out, the only two deviations from trend lines in that chart are in 2007 and 8 when we had circovirus vaccines introduced, a positive animal health event, and in 2013-14 when PEDV came along, clearly a negative animal health event. Well, what did we do with the breeding herd in 2008, 9, 10? We took 500,000 sows out of this breeding herd because we had too many sows given that kind of survival rate under pigs, for our pigs. So we can have those kind of changes. I think the thing to watch if you want to really see what's going to change hog supplies is animal health situations. And so that's one of the reasons everyone's been so concerned about the PRRS situation this year. This is the chart from the University of Minnesota. The current year is kind of that outlined line right in the middle. We've run higher on PRRS incidence this year than we have in the last 4 or 5 years. The question is it significant, and is it kind of bunched up enough that you'll ever see it in the slaughter data? In my career, that's been hard to see in terms of PRRS. It's been very difficult to find an impact of PRRS once you get 6 months later out when those hogs start to market. It tends to kind of smooth out. We think it'll do the same thing here. If we look at PEDV, just like the last 3 years, nothing like the big blow-up year of 2013-14. So we don't think that there's an animal health situation that has hit this year that's going to cause a whole lot of deviation from those supplies. When we put that together in quarterly forecasts, our forecast for slaughter this year, every quarter this year over 30 million head. It was about, I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago when we first killed 30 million head in a quarter, in a fourth quarter. I remember it was quite noteworthy because Professor Grimes, when he forecasted, called me and said, I've never forecast a 30 million head quarterly slaughter again. And now, of course, we have that every quarter this year, 125 million roughly for this year, up right at 3%. We think that's going to grow another 3% in 2019 with significant growth in the first quarter coming. You can see the estimates from LMIC and Iowa State on the left. Not perfect agreement, but some agreement there. We'll have a new kind of stake in the sand again at the end of this month when the June Hogs and Pigs report is published. If you put this into weekly forecast, you get the smooth red line kind of in the middle of this. And we've been within 0.2% so far since March on these numbers, so they've been bouncing right around our line. We're pretty comfortable with that forecast out for the rest of the year at this point. It puts us against slaughter capacity for about 3 weeks this fall. I'm not concerned about that. You have a quantity impact on the market that's certainly going to be negative. I don't think you'll have a slaughter capacity negative impact on the market as well. Next year, you can see 2019, significant growth again, and we would be even pushing against slaughter capacity in the fall of 19, even with another shift at Triumph Seaboard and the opening of the Prestige plant. Okay, and those, there's been a little bit of challenge on both of those. We look at average weights, all hogs right at where we thought we were going to be, and higher than a year ago for the rest of the year. Producer sold barrels and gilts weights have fallen sharply in the last few weeks due to the heat. But we think as temperatures moderate, Joe talked about that a while ago, we're going to move back to and above that 5-year average for a while. Pork production, right at what our forecasts are, up 3.4% in the fourth quarter, in the third quarter, 4.3% in the fourth quarter. The same kind of growth rate into 2019. We'll probably see record levels every week next year. Cash hog prices, we had them in the low to mid 70s this summer. You've got a great opportunity to beat that, especially given yesterday's rally. We still don't think cash prices will be as high as where the futures are. On the fourth quarter, we've got $60. We're going to have some hogs down in the 50s. I don't think there's any question of that. And so, again, be watching this futures market. It's offering you some opportunities all the way out into 19. October went on the board at $64 the other day. From right here where I am, I don't think there's any way we'll have October hogs at $64. Okay? So you need to keep that in mind. Slaughter capacity, they've been just about what we expected. The problem is getting these new plant and the next shift up and going. They've got a real labor problem. And there's going to be some hogs available in the fourth quarter that were supposed to go to Triumph Seaboard that are going to have to find a home somewhere. Packer gross margins, about 5-year average. We dropped back to that 5-year average last fall, and it's going to stay near there all the time. Frozen pork inventories were about as normal in March. We think we think they're going to stay in a normal way. Cutout values up into the 80s this summer, 82 to 85. We'll probably catch it in July. Hog prices somewhere up in the mid-70s and then dropping well down into the 50s in the fourth quarter. I think we're about done here. The lean hogs contract, of course, rallied big time last winter and gave you some great opportunities. We are not going back to those levels. All right. So anybody that's waiting to sell July and August hogs until we get back to the January price, it ain't going to happen. I'm just telling you, it ain't going to happen. You need to make a decision now on whether to cover those hogs. Notice August of 19 is out. June, July, and August 19 on the board at $74. That's a pretty darn good price from what I can see. Profitability this year down to about $4 a head on our model. That number was 30 in January. Since then, corn and soybean has come up. The hog market has sold down. It's made that much of a difference. But I don't think that $30 profit is coming back. The $65 cost number could go down. Joe laid out a great scenario a while ago. If we have normal weather, we're going to have lower corn and soybean meal prices, and you'll bring that number back down towards $61. That's for probably the best 10 to 15% of producers. The average will be $4 to $5 higher than that. So, risks. Major export disruption, foot and mouth disease, that kind of thing is always number one. Number two, trade issues, which are no longer a risk. They're with us, and so we're going to have to deal with them. I hope they go away before they get bad. Labor, plants is a big issue, especially it's going to be a big issue when Prestige and Triumph Seaboard are both trying to hire from basically the same labor pool in northwest Iowa, southwest Minnesota. Diseases, we don't think that that's a big deal this year. It's always a risk, especially if we get a new one of some sort, but we're much better prepared for that now with the Swine Health Information Center. Feed costs higher, but not a 12 or 13 thing, and possibly lower. As we go, demand, good so far. What about domestic? I think we're good on demand for this year. I think next year is questionable, and we'll be watching that pretty closely. On the export side, see trade issues above as far as what happens on that one. And finally, what happens to pork prices if we fill all those plants in the fall of 2019? We are very concerned about prices in the fall of 2019. We think it's going to be a very low price situation, well down in the 50s. I wouldn't rule out some hogs in the 40s. So, but that's a long ways out there. We'll get quite a bit more information on the Hogs and Pigs report as we go through, get the June, September, and December. Really, we won't get an accurate picture until we get to December. I haven't heard of much slowdown in building. We have heard of a few sow complexes that have gotten delayed. That's good. I don't know how long they're going to get delayed, but I think we've got to slow this rate of growth down or it's going to have some pretty dire consequences.